So good morning, everybody. Good afternoon for those who are connecting from Europe, and good evening for those who are connecting from Asia Pacific region. I am Federico Piñero from Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am honored to present this ALEH-ILCA co-organized meeting, Developing Clinical Research in Hepatocellular Carcinoma. So this is the background. Latin America is a region with a low clinical research publication rate. So we aim to develop a short meeting between ALEH and the International Liver Cancer Association to focus on developing programs of clinical and translational research in liver tumors in our region. So our specific objectives were to introduce tools for developing clinical research questions, introduce barriers in our region, and finally to introduce team working and networking around the world. I'm really honored to co-chair with Dr. Bruno Sangro from Spain. Dr. Bruno Sangro, he's the director of the liver unit and co-director of the HPV oncology area at Clínica Universidad de Navarra in Pamplona, Spain. He is also professor of internal medicine and leads an active research group in the Spanish network for biomedical research on liver and digestive diseases, focused on therapeutic innovation in the field of liver cancer. He's past president of the International Liver Cancer Association, and I'm honored to present you, Bruno. Good afternoon for you. Thank you for your participation in this meeting. Bruno, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much, Federico, for your very kind words. Bienvenido a todos los hispanohablantes. It's a true pleasure for me, not only as an individual, but also as past president of ILCA, to have this co-chaired symposium with ALEH. We truly believe that cooperation between scientific societies across the globe is the only way to advance the field forward, particularly in addressing the situations where research is an unmet need in some sense. So to have the discussion today, we have a number of faculty from the ILCA side and also from the ALEH side. From the ILCA side, we have Stephen Chen, who is clinical professor at the Department of Clinical Oncology of the Chinese University in Hong Kong, also the assistant dean at the Faculty of Medicine, and chairman of the Education Committee at ILCA. Amit Singhal, he's professor of medicine at the Southwestern Medical Center in Dallas, where he serves as the medical director for the liver tumor program and the chief of hepatology. And he's been doing research for very many years on early detection and appropriate treatment of patients with hepatocellular carcinoma. Further on, we will have joining very soon Maria Rech, who is now the head of the BCLC liver oncology unit at Hospital Clinic in Barcelona. Is the president of the Liver Cancer International Working Group for Global Liver Institute, and she's also an associate professor at the University of Barcelona. You're probably very familiar with the team and with her. And finally, last but not least, we have the honor to have Philip Johnson with us. He's chair of the Translational Oncology team at the University of Liverpool in the United Kingdom. He's been professor of clinical oncology and head of the department at the Chinese University of Hong Kong for very many years. Chair of Oncology and Translational Research in Birmingham, starting in 2002. And he's been key as director of the Cancer Research UK Clinical Trials Unit, and we'll have the opportunity to talk about this later, and has led many very clinical trials and networking clinical research projects around the world in recent years. With this, I would like to hand over to Federico for presenting or introducing the rest of the speakers.
Thank you so much, Bruno, for this presentation. And I will introduce our faculty and speakers from Latin America. It's an honor for me to present Marcelo Silva, who is the actual hepatologist consultant at the liver unit from our hospital. He's vice director of the academic department at our hospital too, and former ALEH president, and he leads an active research group in Latin America. And Professor Valery Carrillo, who is the head of Department of Gastroenterology and Hepatology from the University of Sao Paulo, Brazil, has led several clinical researches in HCC and liver diseases in Latin America. And recently, he has received honorary recognition from the Royal Academy of Medicine from Catalonia, Spain, and from more recently from the EASL. So this is our agenda, Bruno. I will start to introduce what I think about clinical research barriers in our region. There would be a discussion or an answer from ILCA's representatives. Following this lecture, Maria will try to introduce opportunities in Latin America, and the answer will come from Flair and Marcelo. Finally, there would be two lectures, one focused on networking and leadership in HCC, a global perspective from, it is going to be introduced by Philip Johnson. And finally, Marcelo would introduce a same point of view, but the Latin American experience, and closing remarks and proposals, all our speakers to be discussed in the last 20 minutes. Thank you. So I will start focusing on my lecture on clinical research barriers in HCC in Latin America. How far are we from other regions? Our region, Latin America, it has a wide extension, around 6 million population. Due to this extension, it has a great geographic and socio-cultural heterogeneity, with wide socioeconomic differences among countries. And it has the highest Gini scores around the world, and a transversal limitation in the region is the poor access to healthcare. Indeed, another point is that this paper was published by Amit Singhal years before in regard with the HCC incidence rates per 1,000 population. But I think, in my opinion, we do not have national registries in Latin America. Thus, we do not have robust data due to the fragmentation of healthcare system. So we really do not know the impact of this disease. We do not have really robust data regarding incidence and prevalence of HCC. And this was recently written by my friend Manuel Mendizábal in a paper published some years before. So I think the main barrier here is the uneven access to healthcare. Access to healthcare remains the main barrier that challenges routine screening, early diagnosis, and proper treatment for patients with HCC. The healthcare system in the regions are mainly up of a common payer and provider, that is the state, but in many countries there are other types of health providers through social security and private insurances and providers. So there is an inequity in the access of healthcare, particularly in low socioeconomic classes, with expenditure comes purely and exclusively from public services, which in most cases provide with regular quality of medical care services. The other point is, this is a reality of our region, is that we have a low publication rate. I reviewed during the last years, what is the proportion of papers published in different journals, different liver journals. You can see here Journal of Hepatology, Hepatology, Liver International, Liver Transplantation, and Annals of Hepatology. You can see here the proportion of original papers coming from any country of Latin America is below 1% in the high impact journals. And this increases if we consider our local journals, Annals of Hepatology, with a publication rate of about, publication proportion, sorry, of 17%. So if we focus on Annals of Hepatology, our local journal, and I would like to thank Dr. Marco Resso for this slide, You can see here the top 10 countries by submission and top 10 countries by accepted papers in the journal. And you can see here that there are scanty countries coming from Latin America in the top 10 countries of submission and accepted papers, only including Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and Chile. However, the rejection rate, it's probably, there's a trend of a lower rejection rate when compared to other countries from other regions in this journal. The other thing is that we do not only have lower publication rate per 1,000 population when compared to other countries, and just as you can see here, but also we have that our publications have are submitted to very low impact journal factors with a median impact factor of 1.6, and only 11% of the publications have been published in moderate impact factor journals. So this is a poll, a questionnaire that was published some years before in orthopedics colleagues or traumatologist colleagues. They think that there might be some specific barriers to research in our region. The majority of clinical research is irrelevant, they said. The system perspective is incompatible with traditional research designs. Complex research methods and statistics are too difficult to understand. There's a lack of knowledge, lack of research training, time-consuming, no funding, absence of institutional academic recognition, and finally, they thought, that publication bias against developing countries is a context in this scenario. But the other thing is that, in my opinion, there might be a lack of disease awareness, and this point was already written by Juan Pablo Rapp from Chile. There is a lack of prompt diagnosis and risk stratification. There is undiagnosis and incorrect diagnosis. And you can see here the last publications coming from Latin America in regard with HCC surveillance. You can see there that at least less than 50% of the patients are being followed or are under HCC surveillance programs when they were analyzed in these retrospective cohort studies. But not only surveillance. We have published this paper some years before that we found that there is a low adherence rate to clinical practice guidelines recommendations in the daily practice in our country, in Argentina. 50% of the patients were treated according to the BCLC algorithm, 24% were undertreated, and 23% were overtreated. But more surprisingly, 70% of the investigators thought the decision was made according to the BCLC algorithm. There was a common barrier among each BCLC stage, that the main barrier to indicate the appropriate treatment was the barrier of healthcare access in each stage. The third point is medical education. Our pre-graduate and postgraduate periods, they focus on clinical skills and by the book medical knowledge. This is a common medical education in university and non-university hospital, but also in public or private hospitals. So this goes on, or this results in a lack of epidemiology, statistical analysis, and finally clinical research training, with an overall result with an absence of academic interest, not only across individuals, but also in an institutional level. When we think about institutional level of this academic recognition, and I would like to compare in a different way the European and North American models of academic profiles. And in the Latin American model, there's a lack of academic career. There's a lack of academic profile, as a consequence, a lack of academic recognition, and finally, a lack of interest on publication rates. The other point is that most of our countries speak Spanish as the first language. So there is a language barrier. As you can see here, this publication was published by Federico Villamil some years ago, that you can see here among our local associates of our Association of Liver Diseases, you can see here that 56% of the associates have never published a paper as a first or second author or as a corresponding author in Spanish or in English. But when we focus on in English submissions, these non-publication rate goes up to 64%. Finally, access to novel medical treatments. I think the pros and pros of participating in clinical trials, I think we do have some common limitations or barriers when compared to other regions. Maybe we have some pros because we may be an expanding market, and this will go with a faster regulatory approval. But we do have lots of regulatory and bureaucracy and procedural barriers that finally, in the end, with a shorter enrollment window with a low recruitment rate, this would deal year by year. And finally, we should consider that we live in a vulnerable economic situation in the region. Inflation, currency devaluation, poverty, corruption, increases prices year by year. You can see here that in our country, in Argentina, during the last decade, we had 2,300% of inflation, prices going up, and this goes that there is a limitation, big external and unscheduled external factors that you may have an initial budget for grants, and finally, from one day to another, you have the 50 or less than 50% of the initial budget to perform your clinical research. So I would like to thank your attention, and I will present a short poll that we submitted last week among our associates. ALEH has 1,148 associates. From these, there were 163 respondents to the poll, and 56% of them said that they are actually not involved in any clinical research. 95% said that they were interested in networking. 59% said that they have time to develop clinical research in daily practice, and the most of them they had financial or logistic support barriers for clinical research in our region. So Bruno, I would like to share this, to introduce the discussion to the panel, to the ALEH-ILCA panel. What do you think about our situation, our barriers, or what are your thoughts? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Federico. I think now it's time for the discussion. I think it will be good to have in mind the final slide with all the problems, and because I think it summarizes very well some of the, in my opinion, the key problems in doing research. Many of them are shared across regions, but as you mentioned very, very clearly, there are specific issues in Latin America that may make this problems that are even harder to solve. But before I give any personal opinion, I would like to invite the people in the panel to provide their opinions, and so that we can then discuss on the basis of what their opinions are.
You want to start?
Oh, go ahead, Maria. Go ahead, Maria.
Sorry for arriving later. My point is the problem that Federico mentioned is something that is true in Latin America, but it's also some of them are sharing in other areas, such as Europe, for example, in Spain or in Italy, that the situation is completely different as in the north of Europe. And I like the slide that you show from the answer for the clinicians that want to be involved in research. I believe that this is the reflect of what is the real situation now in Latin America. I would like to ask another question related to that. Do you think that the networking that you already have, I have a lot of networking in Latin America that started with flyers some years ago and you maintain here, it's not enough? Or do you think that the problem is the time more than not networking?
Is it a question for me, Maria?
Yes.
Sorry? Okay.
Yes.
Well, I think there are many, several groups that are interested in networking. We've been working on HCC and liver transplantation, but I think there is interest among our colleagues. There is interest in clinical research, but maybe there is no time protection perhaps for clinical research. They are overwhelmed with clinical working or daily activities. They do not have perhaps this protection of time to clinical research. And in my opinion, from a ALEH perspective, I think there should be an introduction to tools for epidemiological medical education or statistical analysis in the region. I think this is a common need, I think. But to answer to you, I think we may have much more networking in our region. We may have, yes.
If I may jump in before Ahmed. So you have highlighted some problems that are in the end related to having grants or in any possible way having some kind of reimbursement or financing of research. And that speaks for not only for a dedicated time for clinicians, but also for specific activities that you need to pay for when you're doing research. But I would like to, and this is very clear, I would like to introduce some of the opportunities, because the question is, how do we solve these problems? And I think, and I would like to open the discussion for this, I think that the current networking capacities allow to find elsewhere some of the capacities that you may not have in your environment. I'll give a very clear example. There is statistical support. So you may not have in your hospital, within your research team, a statistician that is well-trained, that is dedicated, but it's easy to find this in other places through networking. And then the possibilities, look at today, the possibilities of sharing time, dedicated time with people abroad, I think is really something very valuable. And I'm sure beyond what we discussed now, Philip Johnson later on will talk about this. But Ahmed, please, would like to see what your opinion is about it.
Yeah, thanks Bruno, and thanks Federico for that nice presentation. I think it nicely highlights several of the barriers that are present in Latin America as we think about HCC related research. But I do think that the networking that you have amongst sort of collaborators in Latin America is immense. And I compare this to what we have in the United States, where most investigators will publish on their local institution. And I contrast that to what we see in Europe, where you see many more multi-center studies, and there's more collaborations across investigators. And one of the things that has always stood out to me from the publications I've seen from Latin America are these multi-center publications, which have been able to pool results across 15, 20 institutions. And it's quite incredible about the large numbers that are achievable. And so in contrast to some of the limitations of research, I do think that it's worth also stressing the collaborative nature among those interested in research is one of the greatest strengths that should be continued to be leveraged moving forward. And you pair that with Bruno's comment about networking, whether that's within Latin America or outside, and you may be able to fill some of these gaps in terms of statistical support, research expertise, in terms of design, particularly as we've now all become very used to doing things virtually. I think that you can easily fill these with outside experts as needed. I mean, once again, I would echo Bruno's comments. The fact that you have many of us on this call suggests that there is a lot of interest, much more than there was a decade ago, in terms of advocating for these kind of research techniques, as well as these findings coming out of a global environment. And so, and the last thing that I would say is that that's not only true for local investigators, but also for funding agencies. So when I take a look at, for example, the NIH dollars for US funded studies is actually decreasing, but the global budgets have dramatically increased over the last 5 years. And so, if there are not robust funding agencies locally, then I do think that it's also worthwhile, as you think through external investigators, also thinking through external funding agencies, which can help take a look at comparisons in Latin America and elsewhere for global collaborations.
And on top of that, what I think another important issue is the quality of the data, and a shift that has to occur to be able to compete at a good level is having well captured, prospectively captured data, and this today again is much easier than it was 10, 20 years ago. You have free, and if not, I mean, some of the platforms are free. Some others are you have to pay for them, but you have to pay a very low cost. But you have a number of platforms that are absolutely free, on which you can capture the data, and having prospectively recorded good quality data allows you to be able to participate in networks, let alone do your own research, but further on, participate in networks in a very good position, where, because we have all these plethora of information coming from omics, from so now you can get single cell analysis, you can get all the RNAs that are expressed in a single cell, but you have to do the same with clinical data. You need the best possible annotation of samples or cases to be able to perform. And this is something that has changed and now can be done. Stephen, what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, Bruno. Actually, I really enjoy and also appreciate the difficulty that Dr. Pinheiro has presented. It reminds me the old days, actually not many years ago, when I started my career. So I would like to just share 2 points and to see whether it could help the doctors, the junior or the senior doctors in South America to develop your research career. The first thing is, I think for networking, there are many levels of networking. Some are just social contact, but I think for research, it always have to start with a project. So the project can be small scale or could be big scale. I think for big scale, you can just join some, if possible, join some big a group, if possible, one to learn how they did the research. And also this can also raise your international stance in some sense. You may just contribute a little bit data set, be part of it, then you can also learn from it. And even for some retrospective small scale projects, I think it's still good to publish. I agree with you. I can sense your frustration in publishing in low impact journal. In my early career, I also published in low impact journal. I think it helped. It helped you create a track record, which I think a lot of journals and also a lot of papers, they also look at these. I think it's important to publish to a dedicated topic for, say, few times, like 3 or 4 papers, before you can come to a bigger paper. So I think one of the things that, I don't know, Bruno, we can discuss is ALEH-ILCA, how can we help? I think one is that we can create a platform so that we can have a regular meet to exchange the idea. First of all, to show what we're doing, and also to learn what our South American colleagues are doing, so that we can also give comments and also see if we can help or involve them, engage in some of the project. And if not possible, we can offer some help. I think this is something that ALEH-ILCA could help the South American hepatologists or the HCC research. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So before we go for Maria's presentation, Marcelo Silva would like to comment something.
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. Thank you, everybody, for your comments, and thanks, Federico, for your excellent presentation. And just to be positive, let me share with you that our impression here is that although we have big challenges, at the same time we understand that we have big opportunities, and we would like to focus on those opportunities. At the end of the webinar, I'm gonna be showing you what are those areas, which are those areas in which we do understand that ILCA can help us, working together with ALEH. So it's going to be for sure, your input is going to be very important. Thank you.
Amit, any brief remark?
Yeah, Bruno, I was just going to say 2 things. The first is that, we talked about collaborations when we're coming up with these studies, and I would just remark on the earlier those collaborations start, the better. Particularly, you brought up the idea of robust data collection. And I think it's better to have somebody come in early and discuss what data are being collected, how they're being collected, rather than come in with a paper that's pre-written and saying, can you help us, refine the paper and try to get it into a journal on the back end. And then the second thing is, I think we've talked about sort of study design and training in study design. And I think if there's enough interest, if there's no internal training, I think this could also be something where ILCA may be able to collaborate on, and thinking through a conference specifically focused not on research productivity, but design. So potentially, if this was something of interest, is to come up with a joint conference and even involving other societies, specifically focused on, ideal research design for HCC specific questions across the board: early detection study design, prognostication study design, I think all of these things would be helpful. And what you may not get informal didactic training there, you can have via some of these external conferences.
This is a very, very good idea. Maria, and then you could start after your comments, your own presentation.
Oh, Maria, you're muted.
You're muted.
Sorry. I'd like to emphasize something that Stefan mentioned, that is frustration. I believe that for doing research, the first thing that we need to learn is that we may be frustrated many, many times in the career of a researcher, and we need to move forward for that. If we are prepared for that, and if we share these feelings with the juniors, it would be better to have a good career or organized networking, because it is part of our work. Because all of us have papers that maybe go with one journal to the other, or more than 1 year in a journal, and it was refused. So this is something that I believe it is very useful. And I also echo from Mendizábal's comment in the chat that start from the medical university. It's important, but I believe that for a local point of view, it's also very important to work in the academic recognition, because if you have the recognition in your side, it is more feasible to continue because you have energy, you try to do some, but if at the very end, if you have not recognition, it's very difficult to continue. And this is the only three comments that I have. Bruno, if you agree, I move on to my presentation.
Please, yes.
Yes, okay. So I have the different tasks and also difficult tasks to talk about strength and limitation that may promote or preclude better research proposal and opportunities in Latin America. This is my conflict of interest, but I believe that for this talk, my conflict of interest is here. I'm from Latin America. I did my early career in Patagonia, then moved to Buenos Aires, and at the very end, I moved to Barcelona. So I'm one of the researchers from Latin America that I'm working. I would like to emphasize on Marcel the strengths of Latin America. I have my first mentors in Patagonia with the same criteria, generosity, energy, and also leadership that I have when I moved to Buenos Aires and at the very end to go to Barcelona. And now I have another conflict of interest. Two of our fellows are from Latin America. Sergio Muñoz is from Mexico and Ezequiel Mauro from Argentina. And the mentorship of Jordi, and we try to continue the legacy in ATC, is something that is amazing, but it's also possible in Latin America. I start with the same values there. So I would like to emphasize that the talent and the generosities around the world is not different between regions around the world. Having said that, I try to summarize what we need to have better proposals for research. I believe that we need to have ideas, team leaders, as was mentioned in the previous presentation and also discussion, and knowledge or support for methodology, statistics, and also writing. When we write a paper or a proposal or a grant, it's essential, and I learned a lot from Bruno that is very, very picky in these things when we share some proposals in these things. So I believe that is important. And also protected time, as Federico mentioned, but I believe that protected time is the same problem around the world. I don't know what happened in the north of Europe or in the United States. Maybe Amit would share with us. We discussed something last days about that. But protected time is a problem around the world. And for researchers, you need to live with your research. If you are not organized, your personal life is very difficult to perform research only in your working time. At least here in Spain, it is impossible. So I try to move on the discussion, the protected time, because I believe that is not a problem for Latin America. Proposals. What do we mean by proposals? I would like to share with you some thoughts about that, and opportunities. What kind of opportunities? For what? And when I think about the talk, I believe that maybe we need to think about the evolution of the research in general, but in liver cancer. We have the original research when they tried to do research, the physician tried to do research, organize the laboratory and have all the group around the physicians. Then with ILCA, we understand that for liver cancer, we need to work as a network. It is not from hepatologists or oncologists or radiologists, it's a network. And the network is doing by persons, and you need to work on that and prepare the team building. We need to start from our side and then to the other part. But evolution, and it is not only in ATC, I think so in the world, the leadership and the work is evolved. And now it's not impossible, but it is less probability to publish or to have a grant if you try to work in your hospital, in your group, with your patient, without sharing the data with others. So I agree with Federico that networking is essential. I believe that one of the strengths in Latin America is you have a very well-organized networking. I have the experience with Flarica region from the beginning, and I will show you in the next slide, the networking that he had in Brazil and now is spread for Latin America. So I believe that is one of the strengths that you have in Latin America. And I say you have because now I'm in Spain, but I feel as a Latin American. So maybe I can say we have, but in this case, it is not the case. So the next point is, it is possible to perform pure clinical research. This may be another limitation if you only think about clinical research, because some journals are not allowed for this kind of research. But again, if you are doing clinical research, you need to find the journal for that or the grant, target grant for these things. I believe that it's possible to do clinical research, and here I just to show 4 examples that we work with Latin America in different areas without samples and all of the information. And this is an example of networking between Latin America and international collaboration with Italy, with Massimo Iavarone as a leader of some of these things. So the networking, I think so this is something that you could consider as a strength in the clinical research in Latin America. However, when I prepared the talk, I also remember a talk that I did for the human in hepatology. And I prepared this slide for that talk. And I believe that is strength and limitation for a specific country. Talking as a ILCA representative is very difficult task, and I don't feel comfortable to say it is a limitation or a strength, because it's the same discussion if you talk about male or females. If you only focus in the table for males, you have a lot of discussion to do that. If you focus in this table where only females, you also have some limitation in strength. So I prefer to give you some thought about the different position, but the most important thing is strength and limitation where, in which country, because Latin America is very different, and the situation between the regions are not exactly the same, and strength and limitation for what. And that's why I prepared the talk in this regard. So ideas, as I mentioned before, I have in Latin America, there are a lot of ideas. Indeed, if you do a PubMed, putting ATC in Latin America, you have all of these publications. Start working in 1998, I think so that was from FLAIR. And now today you have several publications, and it reflects of the networking. So I believe that it's a strength in Latin America. Team leader, as I mentioned before, I believe there are team leader also in Latin America, and it is team leader in investigators. Sorry for those investigators that are not in the picture, but I try to find all the pictures that I have in my mobile. And I would like to emphasize Brazil, because as you may know, FLAIR started some years ago, and now Federico is working in Argentina, and also Nacho is working in Colombia, and others are working in other places. So I believe that the ideas and also the teamwork is in Latin America, and I believe that it's possible to continue. Some limitation or issue that maybe it is the window opportunity for ILCA or collaboration is, as Federico mentioned before, the knowledge of support. I prefer to support because the knowledge, not all the physicians, not all the researchers need to know about statistics or the methodologies, but we need to have support for that. And in this case, we need to have availability for electronic medical report, that maybe it is not the case for all the countries in Latin America. In Europe, in the United States, we have electronic medical reports. You can take all the information very easy. If you have the medical record in papers, it's more difficult to find the information. And in this case, you need to invest more time than if you have everything in the PC. And also the role of the multidisciplinary researching, it is essential to, at this day, to have the radiology involved in the research as you involve him or her in the clinical practice to organize the research with them. And maybe this could be some, I don't believe that is limitation. There are some areas for discussing if it's feasible to apply or not in Latin America. But I would like to repeat what Ezequiel Mauro said, and he said that in Latin America, make research is an expensive hobby because you need to use your time, you need to cover the methodologies, you need to cover many, many things. And maybe it could be a limitation if you do not have the support from the institution or networking from the country to support the limitation that you have in terms of methodology or statistical things. So if we focus specifically on liver cancer, I believe that there are gaps for working, and the gaps are the same around the world: prevention, diagnosis, staging, and treatment. When we go to a specific question, understand mechanisms, maybe you need to have a specific laboratory for that. And this is an area that we need to work together. Identify tools for early diagnosis. If you go to the Registries for Latin America, the tumor site is higher than in the other areas, and maybe it could be a limitation for this specific aim. But for the other things, you have other options that is working in staging, working in other treatment or predictors in this regard. Because at the very end, nowadays, everybody talks about radiomic, liquid biopsy, deep learning, but the most important thing, or microbiota, but an important thing, as Bruno said before, is the data. Where is the origin of all of these samples? If you have samples, but the clinical data, it is not good enough, the results will not be positive. So I believe that the most important thing is here in Latin America, there are a lot of patients, there are a lot of places that were less research than in other places. And I was in a discussion also with Amit that we're talking about the fatigue of clinical trials, of clinical research in some areas. And I believe this is a strength for Latin America. There are not this fatigue for these things. The research in liver cancer is essential for outpatient clinic. So we can do research around the world. We don't need technology for do clinical research. And that's why I put here this slide with the center of patient in the clinical research. But for doing clinical research, we need to protocolize clinical practice. And in the setting of countries where private systems are the majority, it's very difficult to protocolize the information. It could be a limitation to have the data. So to finalize this part, opportunities or proposals, how do you identify that one? This is something that maybe ALE and ILCA could work together to promote, to identify these grants and share with the members of ALE. Then opportunities are proposal for what? For training, for fellowship, for participate in external proposals, to be part of the consortium. And this is area that I believe that we work together as ILCA and ALE. For applying international grant, which, where, how, all of these questions is what the members need, and maybe then is an area of opportunity. And mobility grant, sometimes it's easy for the young investigator to have a grant, but for the middle career, who is the real responsible for develop research in the country, it is an area that I still believe that is the most important part for go ahead with more robust research. So I believe that ALE and ILCA have the opportunity to be the path. Protected time, it's not possible to work together on that. Latin America have ideas, patient, leader, and investigator. Methodology, statistical and writing, it is a yellow flag. And protected time, I already mentioned. Electronic medical record, hospital and country policy is maybe the limitation that sometimes is very difficult to solve because it's not on the responsibility of the business for the association of this disease. With this, I would like to finish saying sorry for being later. I was in the Sheila Sherlock presentation. I would like to share with you the lucky situation that I have, that Jordi Bruce was my mentor, and I'm in the home of liver cancer. But you have another leader in liver cancer who started many years ago, he did a very nice network, and it is the Jordi Bruix in Latin America in this setting. Thank you very much, and this is the group that we are at this day.
Thank you, Maria, for your very nice presentation. I would like to introduce to the open discussion to Flair Carrillo from Brazil. Flair, any comment about, quality of data, methodology support, and access to grants that Maria has proposed? Any comments on these points or other points you would like to introduce or discuss, Flair?
Yes, yes, thank you. Nice presentation by you, Federico, and Maria. Thanks so much, Maria, for your kind talk about my group. As you know better than I, to research is not for amateurs. It's difficult to do research, clinical research, translational research. Then I think that in Latin America we have had professionals, but I think that we must involve our institutions to involve them, to show them to our directors, our deans, that it's necessary to research and to put all the infrastructure to perform research. I think that to perform in Latin America clinical research is not so difficult, but we have many problems that was showed here by Maria and by Federico. But I think that for translational research is more difficult, because we have in Latin America some rules, some laws that is difficult to, for example, when you use for translational research to send samples, for example, we have different laws in our countries. Then it's difficult. There are different logistic situations to send samples. Then I think that is for clinical or epidemiological data, it's not so difficult. But for translational, we must have we have in our institution a biobank, it is not so easy to build a biobank. In HCC specifically, it's necessary to work at a multidisciplinary group, professionals. At our Hospital das Clínicas at the University of São Paulo, we have a group, we have clinicians, we have surgeons, transplanted and surgeons, radiologists, interventional radiologists, pathologists, biologists, oncologists, and we have all specialties. But we spent 10 years, just now, we spent 10 years to have this group, and now we have organized to participate. Another problem, I think, that in Latin America, mainly in Brazil, and just now was solved, is to approve a protocol to participate in an international protocol with a new drug, for example. we need 6 months to approve a protocol. Then it's for international participation. It's too difficult when you spend 6 months to approve a protocol. No? Just now.
Sorry, but this limitation is also in other places. I believe that it's essential to work at national level for this kind of thing, because the researcher can solve these issues, and I don't know if the ILCA and ALE could help you on this. Sorry, I see that someone is asking
Maria,
for a question.
We solved this problem just now at our hospital. That is not need to go to Brasilia to take.
Yeah, thank you, Flavio, for this point. I would like to start the discussion about what Bruno and Maria has introduced about quality of data in Latin America, quality of data, because there's a comment in the chat that in some public hospitals, they do not have the electronic medical records. So in retrospective cohort studies, that may lead to selection or very information bias. So, and very hard working to review a written medical record rather than an electronic medical record. So quality of data, Marcelo, methodology support between ALE and ILCA and grants. What are your comments about, or anything you would like to address?
Well, the too many different questions at the same time. Let's start with the quality of the data. The quality of the data is going to be easier to handle whenever you think on a prospective study, and it's going to be hard if you do a retrospective study independently if you have an electronic medical record or is a written paper medical record. So the whole thing is whether we should focus on prospective studies, because whenever you focus on that, you're going to be in some way giving a clear and neat instruction what is the data that is necessary and how to collect it. And that's going to be part of the protocol. So we know that we have a lot of problems when you go into the retrospective studies, but we had been able to handle those barriers and inconvenience when you think on prospective studies, regardless if they are clinical or epidemiological studies. So I'm not too much concerned with the quality of data, because that's a very transversal situation all over, and that can be partially solved whenever you plan a prospective study. But I agree that one of the most critical barriers is how to get into that information. If you have to collect that information from a medical record, or you can get it straightforward through different electronic capabilities, that you can get information, moving the information without having a physician, a young physician, collect, or a nurse collecting the information in the medical records. And more than likely, you friends in the rest of the world probably have access to those technologies that can allow us to transfer what is in an electronic and medical record into a protocol. And again, I like to go back to my previous comments. I do see that we have a lot of opportunities here, and that although we are behind in technology, we are behind in access to grants, and we are behind in an organizational perspective, we have a lot of strengths, different strengths, because we do have patients, we do have a huge population, we do have middle-income countries with a well-trained medical population, and as you already showed in the query that you got from ALE, there is a need, there is an unmet need there, and all the young physicians are willing to get involved with. So, you know, we have some weaknesses, but at the same time, we have a lot of different strengths. And therefore, as a summary, we have good opportunities if we are smart and humble enough to ask for help, for example, from ILCA, and support and coaching. No? And if we go and ask them how to solve each of our single barriers that we have. So opportunities to be humble and to remember that we're in a learning process, in a learning curve of education that is going to impact in Latin America. And as a young generation, you, Federico, and the rest of the team, you're going to have the responsibility to spread this knowledge and tools to the rest of the country and the regions.
Thank you, Marcelo and Flair. Any final comment, Maria or Flair, Marcelo, before moving to the next lecture?
I'm okay.
Okay.
I'm okay also.
Okay, thank you so much, Maria, Flair, and Marcelo. Bruno, if you would like to introduce the next lecture, thank you.
Yeah, before I introduce Philip Jensen, I was listening to this very interesting conversation, and this reminds me, I mean, to some extent, clinical research is like playing rugby. Everybody has a place in there. So you don't need to be too strong, too high. There is room for the 2 meter 10. There is room for the 1 meter 20. And there is a role for everybody. And I think this is important in clinical research. And this is a way to open the podium for Philip Jensen to give us his opinion on what are the key points for developing clinical research. He has a lot of experience in this. Philip, please.
Thank you, Bruno. It's a great pleasure to be talking at this meeting. Networking is very close to my heart at the moment. Can I just confirm that the sound is okay?
It is okay.
Okay. So this is where I come from at the moment, Liverpool. Liverpool is famous for two things. One is pop music and the Beatles, and the second is that we share the same passion as Latin America for football. And we would like to think that we have the best football team in the world at the moment, though Latin America may disagree. There are very few good things about growing old, and I am now very old. And I can look back over 50 years, and it gives you context. So what I'm trying to do over the next 20 minutes is to go through what we've achieved so far in understanding why people get HCC and therefore prevent them from getting it, how we develop treatments for people who have established HCC, and what has been the global impact of networking. And particularly important, what we can learn from studies that have been successful and those that haven't been successful. I've been around so long now that when I started in HCC, we didn't even have CT scans. There was no hepatitis C. There was virtually nothing about hepatitis B, and we didn't use the Charles-Pugh classification. So I'm going to start with a phone call that I got 40 years ago from the editor of The Lancet. Reviewing papers was very different in those days. And he said to me, Phil, I've got this paper from Taiwan. I'm not sure where Taiwan is, but it looks quite interesting. And the reviewing process was, do you think we should take this? And I read it and said, yes, I think we should take it. And it was the foundation of some of the most important HCC research that's ever been done. And this is what the study showed, just to remind you of those who won't remember this. Came from Taiwan. First author was Palmer Beasley, and they took 20,000 plus male Chinese civil servants, followed them up for 10 years. In the HBsAg negative group, 9 developed HCC. In the positive group, it was 152. And this gave you the huge relative risk of 98.4. This led on directly to hepatitis B vaccination. And in 1997, you could see that the HBsAg carrier rate was falling from 10% pre-vaccination down to less than 1%. And for today's discussion, important to note that the incidence of HCC obviously had to be in children then, and that was also falling. And 30 years later, it's even more dramatic. And you can see that chronic liver disease, hepatocellular carcinoma, incidence and mortality have all fallen dramatically since vaccination. Now, the person behind all this was this guy, Palmer Beasley. Palmer left his post, a senior post in Washington, to move to Taiwan in 1967, and he stayed there for 14 years before becoming director of the American Medical Center in Taipei. He actually married one of his co-researchers while he was out there. And his list of achievements, or the achievements, I should say, of his team, but under his leadership, was quite staggering. He showed that HB was transferred from mothers to infants during childbirth rather than in utero. He confirmed the role of the virus in causing liver cancer. He showed that immunoglobulin protected babies at birth. He persuaded the health authorities to develop vaccination against hepatitis B. And he worked hard with the World Health Organization, so that by the end of 2011, 179 countries worldwide had used hepatitis B as part of their national vaccination program. When he died in 2012 from pancreatic cancer, John Mendelsohn from MD Anderson said, "Dr. Beasley has saved more lives from cancer of the liver worldwide than MD Anderson has for all cancers." And when his obituaries were written in Taiwan, the headline was, "Everybody born after 1984 should say thank you to Dr. Beasley." Few important points. Everybody now knows that hepatitis B is a cause of liver cancer. In those days, they didn't. Everybody thought we knew the cause. It was aflatoxin. Funding agencies were only interested in environmental causes of cancer, and he had to fight very hard to get any funding. Second thing to notice is that he had big political problems. Jimmy Carter was the president of the United States, and things were not good with Taiwan and China. And again, he managed to get funding at a time of very high political tension. So he was very much the model that I tried to follow. And following his experiences, I moved to Hong Kong in the early 1990s. And there were two opinions of this move. My boss, Roger Williams, said to me when I told him I was leaving the liver unit at King's, he said, "Phil, you may earn some money, but that will be the end of your academic career." Palmer Beasley said to me, "Phil, when you get to China, you can finish the story. You can organize a proper randomized trial of surveillance." They were both wrong. I tried very hard to develop a trial of surveillance for HCC, but it was a complete failure. I earned a lot of air miles, but there was no success. And it's quite interesting to look back and see what the cause of failure was. These are the essential lessons from attempts to institute surveillance or run a randomized trial of surveillance. Only China succeeded in running a trial. You may not think very much of the trial now, but it was of its time and it was done. Japan led by introducing a national surveillance program without a trial. And the West didn't manage to run a trial of surveillance, and surveillance rates remain very low. And for today's topic, it's worth just comparing Japan and the West, because it has some implications for doing collaborative international research. These are the changes in survival in Japan since screening was initiated. And this is from a small hospital in Japan that I work closely with. And these are the survival rates by decade. And you can see here, it's easier to see here. Pre-screening, the median survival was less than 3 months. By 2013, median survival was up to 52 months, and now it's well over 60 months. And you can see the percentage of the population screened. By 2013, it was nearly 77%. Now it's nearly 85%. And these results are representative of the whole of Japan. Now look at the situation in the West. This paper was very recently published about surveillance of patients with cirrhosis in the United States. Adherence rates for HCC surveillance, less than 10%. Let me remind you of what it is in Japan, more than 80%. And you have to ask the question, why is there a difference? Why does the Japanese experience not inform Western practice? And I think we have to be very honest here, and there has been some allusion to this already from previous speakers. I think there is a lot of Western arrogance. There is an implicit distrust of anything not done outside recognized Western centers. And there is also a feeling that Japan is just different. It's an outlier. And I notice this when I look at papers that I review for journals, and you will often see the phrase at the beginning of the paper, this is the first study done in the United States, or the first study done in Europe. And I wonder, should every study be done in every country? Could we have, this was the first study done in Costa Rica, this is the first study done in India, and so on. And it raises the question, are there really ethnic or regional variation in HCC outcomes that are not explained by differences in recognized clinical features? Certainly, you'll all remember that when we do clinical trials, we separate patients from the East and from the West. And the question is there any real rational basis for this? Is HCC not HCC wherever it is? And the only differences are in its etiology. And this is an important topic that we need to address. What about my lessons from global clinical trials? It's very apparent that there are few trials that are successful without pharma company sponsorship. And this leads us to the difficult tension between what is clinically important and what is commercially important. And often we do the trials that are commercially important and neglect those that are clinically important. Important trials have been undertaken without commercial support. For example, the TASTE trial from Spain and many ablation trials from Eastern centers. In the UK, we can run large randomized controlled trials with government and charity support, And a good example would be the recent trial of steroids in COVID, which has been very influential. But nonetheless, international studies remain difficult, and even just simply national trials impose a very heavy regulatory burden. By 2010, I'd become very disillusioned with research in HCC. When I started, translational research was translating basic science and technologies into clinical health improvements. Nowadays, translational research is translating research into money. It is the monetization of research, and the combination of heavy regulatory burden and the necessity of raising money led me to retire and stop working in the field completely. I decided I had better things to do than sit on committees to raise money and sort out regulation of clinical trials. It turned out that I didn't have better things to do, and after 3 months retirement, I figured that there might be a way that I could do some useful research without problems of money and regulation. And this is, I think, very relevant to what we're talking about today. My idea was to develop an alternative approach to collaboration based on networking. And I drew up Model HCC project. And this was the idea. We would take all the aspects of HCC, hepatic function, curative treatments, survival, decompensation, sorafenib, best supportive care, biomarkers, and develop statistical models for each of those. And the key requirements were to be very rigorous statistical methodology using large data sets, internal validation, external validation, only using available clinical features. And these models have to be applicable at the bedside, globally, and at the individual patient level. To do this, you need networking and data, not money. And so the other advantage I had from my great age was that I had a lot of friends around the world. And so I wrote to many of them over the years and asked them if they would be prepared to share data. And this was the result. By 2019, we built a large clinical research network. The person who started this, who I discussed it with and offered me the first data set, was none other than Bruno Sangro. I don't know if he remembers this, but it must be a good 10 years ago. And one morning in my inbox came a data set beautifully annotated from Bruno involving 850 patients. And thereafter, we got a lot of collaboration from around the world, so that by 2019, we had detailed individual patient data on about 200,000 cases, probably nearly 250,000 now. All stages, all treatments, all etiology, a lot of clinical variables, nothing molecular because you can't do that at a global level. So the question is, was it a success? And as others have suggested, one of the markers of success is where you publish the results. I want to stress here that the key to success was to have no money. If you have money, you can't run something like this because you have to have a system for spreading the money out, and it becomes very tricky. Everybody here worked entirely on the basis of goodwill. And the publication record suggests that some colleagues found this research worthy. These were the primary papers that were published, but there were many spin-offs from each of them. So Journal of Clinical Oncology, which is now top oncology journal, J Hepatology, Hepatology, BJ Cancer, and so on. And this allows me to look back and see what the lessons are from this networking. And these are the lessons. First of all, international colleagues and people in South America should be aware of this, are incredibly generous with time and data. As people have suggested, what you end up if you get involved in a network is a virtual department that has virtually infinite expertise. You can find out anything you want from a group like this. And you can escape from money and excessive regulation. I should emphasize here that when I say we didn't use any money, there was no money at all specifically for this project. Obviously, the collaborators all have their day jobs to do. And this works provided that you get the papers out, that you are generous with credit and authorship, you ask relevant questions, and you keep up to date with analytical techniques. And this is something that ILCA ALEH could do. They could coordinate different sharing partnerships. But it's not all easy. It looks like a good model for international collaboration and networking, but there are very many limitations. This only works for observational studies. You have no control over the quality of the data. You get the data that's available, not necessarily the data that you need. In effect, what you're seeing is that you lose all the advantages of a randomized controlled trial. The papers are difficult to write. The TASE paper, which we published in Hepatology, had 35 authors, and believe you me, it was very difficult to get consensus between 35 very knowledgeable co-authors. The models only account for a small variation in the endpoint. An outsized randomized trial, survival is a dubious endpoint. You don't know when to measure survival from. And as Bruno will tell you, journal editors are getting tired of prognostic models. So is there any future for such big data driven studies? And I think there is. And here's 4 ideas that I will briefly show you before finishing. The data that you collect in these networking ambitions can be used to build virtual control groups. You can move on to cure as an endpoint rather than survival. RCTs are having limitations now, and there may be better sources of data. So just to show you these very briefly. Once you have a good statistical model for survival, for example, here we use sorafenib, you can develop virtual control groups so that you can take a series of patients receiving TASE, and this is their survival, and you can say, what would have happened if this precise group had been treated with sorafenib? And you can see it looks like sorafenib is inferior to TASE. The problem has always been getting statistical inference from these 2 groups, and I think we can do that now. But this is very much work for the future. The second thing is that we can use big data sets to look at cure rather than survival as an endpoint. And the person who's been pivotal in doing this is Alessandro Crucetti, who is a remarkable surgeon who does liver transplants during the day, and his hobby is mathematics and statistics and writing papers in the evening. Cure occurs when mortality of patients treated for a specific disease returns to the value expected in a reference population. And this is the figures for potentially what we call potentially curative therapies for HCC. And you can see here that in fact, the major potentially curative therapies, the chance of cure is actually very low. It's probably only 20%. And in some subgroups, the chance of cure is much less than 5%. So using cure instead of survival may be a future option for networking research. And when you talk to patients who are receiving surgical resection or ablation, and they ask you about prognosis, it is, of course, very difficult to say anything sensible. But if you can tell them what the chance of being cured is at the individual patient level, I think this might be much more helpful. Thirdly, randomized trials have limitations. This is a quote from Jan van Veerge, and he said, well, let me introduce this by saying that one day I am led to believe we will have specific treatments for specific molecular variants of HCC. And as he says, the gold standard of randomized confirmatory phase 3 trials are not always ethical or feasible when developing drugs for treatment of small cancer populations. So if you have a specific drug for a specific mutation, it may be very difficult to set up a randomized phase 3 trial for that. We may need to have different methodologies. And if you're interested in this, this is the paper that set me off down this line. It's published in Hepatology, Beyond Randomized Controlled Trials, a comparison of controlled trials and non-randomized studies. And it's very well worth reading. And then finally, there are alternative and better sources of data, which haven't been mentioned today. And one of them is that old drug trials are gold mines of data. The data is very high quality, you have big numbers, it's often prospectively collected, and you may have embedded control data. When you read a paper of a clinical trial, you probably see only about 1 or 2% of the total data that was collected within that trial. And I know that having access to sorafenib versus brivinib or sunitinib or lenapinib has permitted us to develop several high impact papers. And it would be useful if organizations such as ILCA could lobby pharma to make data from old clinical trials available to researchers. And then finally, just one salutary story that is going to cause trouble in the future for networking and data-driven studies. We obtained data from a commercially sponsored observational studies, and we were promised that once the study had been completed, we would be given access to this data, and it worked well. The first trial, the first study we did, they gave us the data and we published it. But then I made the mistake of asking permission the next time. And this was the letter which I'm going to share with you to finish. And it said, this is what the company wrote to me. When the company sponsored the study, the company fully intended to share the data from this study with external researchers. However, laws regarding privacy and the use of personal data have changed dramatically in the past few years. One of the most important privacy law changes is the EU General Data Protection Regulation, which was adopted in 2016. And then they told me, you should destroy the data you already have in your possession, not use it for any further research, as based on our analysis, doing so would be in violation of privacy laws, including GDPR. And then they very helpfully said, one way to rectify this issue would be for the company to obtain updated consents from every study participant. And as you can imagine, 95% of the study participants were actually dead. So it wasn't very practical. And I think this is an issue that people involved in data-driven research are going to have to resolve. When I left Hong Kong, one of my colleagues sent me this slide, and it's a good slide to end on, I think, and very relevant to HCC research. You will see that this was from the first ever Chinese medical text, written 2600 BC. This is when the West was just coming out of the Stone Age. And this is what it says. Inferior doctors treat the full-blown disease. Mediocre doctors treat the disease before it becomes evident. Superior doctors prevent the disease. And my guess is that the future of HCC is going to be in prevention. And as you know, and Palmer Beasley always hoped, hepatitis viruses are going to be eradicated. And this will lead to a vast change in HCC, since it's predicted that viral hepatitis may be eradicated by 2030. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Johnson, for this outstanding presentation. Bruno, any comment about it before introducing Marcellus?
No, not really. Thank you very much. I think it highlights most of the key issues that we were discussing earlier, and it will be a good room for settle the room for good discussion later on.
All right, thank you, Marcelo. Would like to start sharing your presentation.
Can you allow me, please? Okay. Are you seeing the presentation? Are you able to see it? Hello?
Yes, it's okay.
Okay. Well, again, outstanding presentation after this presentation by Dr. Johnson. No, I feel ashamed of what I'm going to be presenting, you know, but the whole idea is, as we mentioned before, to be transparent and show where do we stand in ALEH, what do we think we are, what are the opportunities and the challenges. So I'm gonna start moving into it. And as I already mentioned, we do understand that we have several weaknesses. Latin America is a region composed mostly of low and middle income countries with fragmented and segmented healthcare systems. And this is not just wording, it's really a barrier to improve the care of the patients, prevention of diseases, and also research. And we do have wide disparities in healthcare access and also into medical education. So it's not the same if you talk about Sao Paulo in Brazil, that if you talk about, you know, a different region in the middle of the jungle in Bolivia, no? So it's a very uneven and with different disparities. And as you already mentioned, Federico, we have a low private and public investment in clinical research. And funding resources in the region are primarily obtained from pharma and diagnostic companies, and only few of these fundings comes from official government offices. But we do have some strength also, no? We have a huge population, more than 600 million inhabitants in the region, coming from different ethnic origins and different situations. And in our population, we have a high prevalence of viral and non-viral cirrhosis and HCC. And the middle-income countries have a good medical training and research capabilities. So we're not blinded doing research. We have to get together to build up a good team. That's a different thing. But we do have trained people, physicians, and hospitals, as already mentioned Maria clearly. No? And the recent COVID pandemic in some way facilitated the learning of new forms of education and outreach programs, which can perhaps partially compensate access to these care disparities. And as you already mentioned, there is an increased interest in what is called the real-world evidence and networking research. From ALEH, the view, the perspective that we have is that we have to go, in order to improve clinical research in the region, focus on HCC, we have to improve our continuous specific disease education. So if you start educating people in HCC on any other liver cancer, we have to have continuity. It's a must. If we don't have continuity, we're not going to be able to increase awareness, surveillance, and interest in research. No? We have to get access or facilitate the access to postgraduate ILCA overseas training. There was a comment in the chat that the young physicians not only want to get trained here in Latin America, but also are willing to get trained overseas, because the quality of the training is going to be different. And in a short period of time, they're going to get a higher level of training. And if they do return to our local or regional countries, they're going to in some way establish new educational sites. And we have to focus also in the improvement of what we already know, that we have research networks that are working well, and I'm going to show you some of those networks in the region, but we have place to improvement. And we have to, in some way, focus on young investigators in not only in the training on HCC, but as you already mentioned, Federico, research in the training processes. I mean, they need to learn epidemiology, they need to learn statistics, I need to learn it, and the young physicians also need to learn. So just to show you what I have mentioned recently, disease education followed by research. If we don't have disease education first, we're going to be unable to run clinical trials. No? And as we already know, the education paradigm has been changing. What we have been used to do in the pre-COVID era, where the attendance used to move into the big meetings, no? And most of the care of the patients was hospital-centered. And the quality of the interaction and networking at those sites was really good, but the costs were high and they were time-consuming. Yeah, I used to spend a week out of the hospital whenever you want to go to one of these meetings. And they were intermittent. They did not have too much continuity. No, but when the COVID came, the whole picture changed, and we started doing exactly the opposite. The knowledge started moving through technology. The knowledge was transferred and oriented towards the attendees. We were able to develop more continuity, like the one that we're getting here with these webinars. And we start working with short reviews and clinical cases. And afterwards start working with hybrid type of meetings with a better quality of interaction. And if you want to get into the real world data, we need to get to the basis of the pyramid. To the basis of the pyramid for me is to every single physician in the region, most of the primary care doctors, internal medicine, not only focus the research with our hepatologists, because most of the information is not going to be sitting just with hepatologists, it's going to be sitting in other medical population. And with that focus, we ran a lot of different activities for the past year and a half in ALEH. Activities that were focused with COVID, activities that were focused on cirrhosis, activities with ASLD together with COVID, local activities again with COVID, and with also cholestatic liver diseases, some of them sponsored by the industry, others not, local activities, presential activities in HCC in countries in which there is a higher incidence of HCC, and more recently with Federico and Manuel, we shared in Colombia a very nice presential meeting integrating all the process from prevention, primary care, towards the end of the disease, as Dr. Johnson mentioned, that is HCC. But if we were able to work from the very beginning, and if we're able to train people from the very beginning, more than likely we're going to have a better impact on the outcome of the disease. Let's move now into the registries and networks in hepatology. And one of the questions that has been raised by Dr. Johnson is, can real-world data, evidence, fill up registry study gaps? No, at least for me, this is a very important question. I've personally learned recently in the past 10 years, the importance of this real-world data that is able to change different clinical procedures. This is one of our old papers when we start working in real-world data. As you can see here, this is in the field of viral hepatitis, collecting information with a very old treatment of hepatitis C, and we're talking about 22 years ago. No? And as it has been mentioned, most of this real-world evidence, in some medical scenarios, is seen kind of a little science, no? And I really appreciate a lot the previous talk, because Dr. Johnson, showed very clearly, this is not little science. This science has a lot of impact on the burden of the disease, has a lot of impact on what can be done on policymakers, has a lot of impact of what can be done in medical schools. They are not randomized clinical trials, as he mentioned, but the data, when the study is designed appropriately, is for sure going to have impact. Data validation has already been asked as a question, you know, as a weakness, but as it mentioned, whenever you have a sufficient N of participants, we are going to be able to deal with that also if you have a prospective design and execution of the study. And today, real-life studies have more than 35,000 citations in PubMed. Real-life studies in liver diseases, more than 800 citations in hepatitis and cirrhosis. And I do not have the information on HCC, but more than likely they're going to be a huge number of them also. And there is also always this kind of, you know, controversy, whether we should move in one direction through randomized clinical trials and or if we should move into the other direction of the real-world evidence in epidemiologic or, if not, outcome information on different diseases. And for me, there's no controversy because we need the two of them. And the question from ALEH is, where can we start from? Which is our baseline? We should be starting doing that research that we're able to do without funding or with very little funding. And whenever we have the tools, the trained people and the patients. So we don't need any special technology. We need to have a very clear idea of what is the research question, a very nice support on methodology and biostatistics, and then improving our writing. And I'm going to show you which are some of the active networks that we have in LATAM. No? We do have and run the last year a couple of important studies in ALEH with COVID and liver diseases. There is an older network that is called Latin-DILI that it deals with drug-induced liver injury in the entire region and has a very nice experience with the Spanish network. And there is an Ibero-American Latin-DILI that includes also Spain. We have run with Federico and Manuel Lalren in hepatitis, in viral hepatitis. We have run Lalren in HCC, and there are other networks very active in ascites, transplant, and the chance with acute on top of chronic liver failure. No? And this is a paper that we published 5 years ago when we started getting into the details of what were our challenges in the region and what were our opportunities. And 5 years later, I do recognize that although we have challenges, we have more opportunities than challenges if we have a clear plan where we should go. Because we don't need costly technology. We need to have good questions and good methodology. And this is just to briefly show you some of the outcomes of this kind of approach that we went through in ALEH. No? Studies that have been already published, not in very important journals, but at least have been published. And we need to improve the process, but those were not just abstracts, were full papers that were published in peer-reviewed journals. This DILI, as you can see, has several publications. I'm not going to show all the publications, just to show you that some of the networks have a better impact. This is when the creation of a consortium provides useful answers. This is the Latin American experience in chronic liver disease from ASLD. This is in Annals of Hepatology, building a Spanish Latin American network. So there is experience. And again, the Latin-DILI registry experience a successful ongoing collaborative strategic initiative. And if we move into viral hepatitis, again, a lot of full paper publications in the past 7-8 years. This is from 4 years ago, now on the treatment outcome and the risk or not, if we were able to decrease the risk of HCC with the direct acting antivirals in patients treated. No? Again, the linkage of treatment of viral hepatitis and hepatocellular carcinoma and disease progression of hepatitis C beyond HCC, see, when we treated and cured virologically these patients. And they're much more than these three. This is just as an example. A lot of published papers in better journals that we had been able to publish, just collecting information all over Latin America. And Dr. Johnson also mentioned, you know, one of the critical issues, whenever you get with pharma companies, you're going to get a bias, you're going to get a pressure, you're not going to be 100% free. You're not going to be 100% free, or you're not going to have enough freedom to do what you think is better to do with the information that you already accomplished. No? And this is one of the examples that we obtained after publishing these real data, real world evidence studies. We were able, as a society, ALEH went and applied for a grant and achieved a grant from a pharma company in order to study or improve the linkage to care and treatment on hepatitis C patients. And this is a very nice example, at least in my experience. We went to the entire region, Latin America, and requested friends from different hospitals to go back to the medical records and collect information retrospectively on hepatitis C. And what type of information we were collecting? we were collecting information regarding linkage to care. How many patients were lost in the follow-up? And we went through more than 10,000 medical records with the diagnosis of hepatitis C. And the final story is that we were able to identify that 50% of those patients that were at some point seen in a hospital in our region were lost in the follow-up and care. And we were able to re-engage with care and treatment 50% of that 50%. And that has been presented at different meetings, and the paper is being written now by Manuel Mendoza. So can be done, and we did not use any sophisticated technology. Moving into networking and leadership in HCC in the region, well, I have Federico sitting there, and he's the one that has been leading this for the past 5-6 years through the similar network that we have been using in hepatitis C and in DILI. Again, just to go briefly through some publications that we were able to publish with the same approach: networking, education, and networking. Education through ECHO, and networking with a registry, with a simple technology, and with a commitment of the network all over the region. Surveillance of HCC, does the place where ultrasound is performed impact in effectiveness? No, it's an important one, because we do have the sense, we do have the feeling that, you know, whenever we do surveillance with an ultrasound, results are not good, but we need to prove it. And what Federico was able to demonstrate in this study, that according to where it's done the ultrasound, the outcome, the results are different. No, what he already showed, the adherence to the BCLC algorithm for HCC, there is a huge gap, and the huge gap in the medical sites is because we don't have access to care in a similar fashion, in a similar manner. So again, the system, the healthcare system, has a lot to do also, and we can probably need to impact on that. And another one, liver transplantation for HCC, evaluation of the alpha-fetoprotein model in a multicentric cohort in Latin America. So we are used to work in networking, collecting information. And another one, recurrence of HCC after liver transplantation, prognostic and predictive factors of survival in another Latin American cohort. But one of the most important, and this is what we would like to do with ILCA, no? Start working not only in the region, but also working with a networking that is intercontinental. No, we have in this panel, we have people from everywhere, from Europe, from Asia Pacific, from the States, and we are sitting here in Latin America asking for your coaching and help in order to improve what we already accomplished. And this is one of the examples of this has been done, again, led by Federico with the European network. So networks in LATAM, why are they convenient? Do we need to ask this question? At least I do not, but if anybody in the audience still is asking the questions, I'm going to give you the reasons why we need to keep working and improve our networks in LATAM. Because we usually obtain complementary information which is not in the scope of the industry-sponsored registry studies. They're going to be looking for other goals. They're going to be looking for approval of the medications. And they're not going to be using their money in order to get information that is not very useful for them. And that's going to be, as a society, our responsibility. This kind of complementary information is not little science, as Dr. Johnson already mentioned. This information improves decision-making processes in clinical grounds, and we generate also research questions that can be redirected to pharma companies promoting investigators-initiated studies. And network consortium's findings may also impact on policymakers. What are we lacking? Capability of expanding these networks, moving towards what I call observatories, because whenever we develop a database, that in my perspective, database needs to be alive. They should not be close or oriented or focused only to one study. We need to be smart enough to create databases that keep alive and that we can do data mining with a database that is still open. No? Of course, we know that we have limited resources, limited number of participants because they are not engaged with clinical research, and we have an inadequate management of these tools databases. No? And as you already mentioned, low rate of full paper publications. And this is a recently published paper that I really like it because it shows me that there is technology there that linkage medical research and allows researchers to exploit and enhance existing data sources without the time and cost associated with primary data collection, because that's a barrier that we have experienced in every single one. I'm from the board of ALEH, no? Federico introduced me as a past president of ALEH. I want to tell him that I'm still the president, and I have at least 6 more months to work on this. And the purpose of this meeting, Federico, is this one. We need ILCA to work together with ALEH in this area, education and research, and helping us from a strategic standpoint. In this case, in HCC, not in the other diseases, and we're doing what? Doing this, no? ILCA Education Task Force, you know, ILCA School of Liver Cancer. Can we run it in Latin America? Has it ever been run in Latin America? Could that impact on the interest of the physicians in this field specifically? Can we get better training, those that were older people, no? Can we get connected with other ones? So there is a room for this education joint task force in Latin America, oriented together, joined with ALEH. Registries and networks in HCC. As I mentioned already, we have some experience, but we need to expand it, and we need to learn how to get better resources in order to be able to expand it. And what I really like is the idea of convert these databases on observatories. So we are going to be able to follow the disease in the long run. Mentorship activities. As has been asked in the chat, we have young investigators that can go to the ILCA for short or long rotations, clinical research or clinical fellowships, and or joint training programs. ALEH and USA and other European or Asia Pacific universities. We need to create, you're going to help us a lot if you open the doors from different universities in order to send our young investigators, young physicians to get trained in HCC and in research, as Maria is doing in Barcelona. We have the Argentinian mafia there, no? We have Maria opening the door, but we need other doors. And the ILCA support, you know, in one of the most important things, at least for me, is helping us to rewrite or to rethink those papers in order to improve the impact factors of the journals that we are sending our population. And the last one is inviting you, September 2022, we have our regional meeting in Buenos Aires this year. And I do know that ILCA is going to be present with a joint symposium. And that's one of the ways that you're going to be helping us in our continuous effort to grow as a scientific society. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo, again for this outstanding presentation. There's noise around here. There's students all around in the university. If you, I would like to introduce all the ALEH and ILCA representatives to go for the closing remarks and proposals to start working to be the starting point this meeting to future networking activities. Bruno?
Yeah, so I think I'm very happy of the outcome of this meeting. I will be more happy if we, in the next minutes, agree on a number of things that we can do to keep the momentum. And I think it will be important for ALEH and ILCA to have a continuous dialogue over the next weeks and months. And I would suggest a couple of people from both societies to meet regularly over the next weeks and months to set up a program with specific actions to be taken. And actions could be involved a very wide variety of things. You mentioned education. Certainly, an ILCA school has never been run in Latin America, and this is a very good idea. There's absolutely no obstacle for that, and this is something certainly we can work for. Also, we've launched this as a new tool for expanding education, a series of webinars, regular webinars, and I think your input and participation in those could also be very valuable. Then you've mentioned platforms, and that's absolutely true. But not only platforms and education, but also mentoring is something we can very easily work in together. And in that regard, even we have to talk about potential joint fellowships for good researchers or potential good researchers. And on top of that, I would say a lot of this, Maria mentioned in the very beginning, is about networking. And I would strongly advocate particularly for young people, to start establishing a network outside Latin America by attending ILCA meetings, either face-to-face or virtually. And there's a good opportunity there. We just this year put a lot of focus on the Young Investigator program. And there is a very active Young Investigator group at ILCA, developing their own, or the activities based on their own interests. And we have devoted prime time for these activities at the annual meeting, but not only, throughout the year. And I would like to have, I'm finishing as a past president, but both Amit and Stephen are governing board members that will remain there for a long period. And I would strongly encourage them to, and I would suggest that they could be perfect people to engage in this continuous dialogue with ALEH. I would like to see your opinions, hear your opinions, Amit and Stephen.
Yeah, I thank you, Bruno. I just want to send a remarks as a chair of the Education Committee of the ALCA. We are very pleased to continue the dialogue. Personally, I'm particularly interested in some of the joint symposium or some of the training sessions on some of the research methodology for the young fellows. I think we can discuss about these and probably have a 1 or 2 rounds of these events this year. I think this can be a good start for the relation between the ALCA and the ALEH. Thank you.
Yeah, I would also like to just echo these same comments. I think the Young Investigator group is a great opportunity to have folks join and to extend that. And I think that would be great for folks coming into research. And, as we've discussed, I think these kind of workshops in terms of discussing research methodologies, not only from a didactic perspective, but I think hands-on workshops as we move forward
where people can take some of the lessons learned, come back and actually bring in proposals that can be refined working with people that are involved in that field. I think the benefit of those hands-on workshops is it not only talks about the methodologies, but then naturally establishes collaborations that will help move it forward in a global method sort of collaboration. And so I think those things would be really nice for ILCA and ALEH to work on moving forward.
Maria?
I make a comment. I'm not from the final remark, but I can avoid my intervention. I have an idea that ILCA is a multidisciplinary association. ALEH is for hepatology, and maybe to improve the engagement of members in the liver cancer field in Latin America, ALEH could work with other associations, for example, for radiology associations around Latin America, or for surgeon association or oncology association. We try to work together in the joint efforts for engaged people to work on liver cancer, because if you have only the hepatology or the gastroenterology involved in the meeting and then come back home and there's not the support for the other, it is more difficult to work on that. And maybe it could be an idea for working to have a specific program for Latin American experts or young investigators that would have the capacity to have at least 2 members from the same hospital to go for the fellowship or other actions.
Marcelo or Frair, any final comments, or Philip, do you want to add any comments? Sorry.
Yeah, I would have one comment. I think it's very important that you focus on the young investigators. And it's not just a question of education, it's a question of inspiration. And what we need to do with the youngsters is to show them how exciting a life in research can be, and how it can be the key to traveling the world and meeting a lot of interesting people that you would never come across if you stuck to your own clinical practice.
I'd like to add that we hepatologists, we need to learn a lot with the oncologists, with the new drugs, the carcinogens, and I think that is. But in Latin America, there is no a good relationship with how to treat those patients on the hepatologists, gastroenterologists, or the oncologists among the drugs. Then I think that the young investigator program that I would like to emphasize this problem in Latin America situation.
Federico, may I?
Yes, go ahead, Marcelo.
I'd like to thank everybody. Really, it has been personally a very nice and learning experience, and I enjoy a lot the friendship that we're getting from ILCA, the coaching that we're getting for ILCA. And Bruno, of course, as a former rugby player, I know there is place for everybody here, and I have no problem at all with that. And that's the reason why ALEH has to be humble. We do have some tools, we do have some learning, we do have some knowledge, but we have to be humble, and we need to keep growing. And you're going to be our old brothers that are going to show us the way. And Dr. Johnson, inspiracy, leadership, absolutely. I mean, we need to move forward with our young investigators and young physicians. It's part of our duty to do that. Not only in research, also in care with patients, in access to care, in everything. we need to be very inspirational and to be able to motivate them in order to break all those challenges that we have in the region. But we know that we have that kind of people here. So we're confident that we're going to be able to do it if we work together. And I agree with Bruno that we need to develop an agenda. And one of the things that has been really useful for us as a young association is to systematically get together with our old brothers and ask for questions, go back to the school, do whatever you want to do, and in a couple of months, see whether we stand. Accountability. So you're going to be not only, we're going to be asking you for the coaching, but also to be strong and be sure that we are able to accomplish the goals that we're setting up together. So thank you very much. And for me, this is a very unique experience that ALEH is not gonna forget. Thank you.
Congratulations in setting this up. Very great achievement.
Okay, I would like to thank all of you, your time, your participation, your generosity for this time, for this. But I would like to ask for you, Marcelo, and for you all that this is the beginning, you know. This is the beginning with this joint working and networking opportunities. There are other comments in the chat that they are asking for including nurses in this working and clinical research opportunities. I think it's a very big issue to address. And again, thank you all for your time, your participation. I'm really happy on this meeting, and have a good day, you all. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias.
Bye-bye. Adios.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.